Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we've got Linda, Melissa, Barbara, Terry, Nancy. Thank you all for joining us this morning for Books and Genealogy. Can everybody hear me okay? If not, will you shoot a little message in the chat box? Let us know. My name is Jessica, and I'm here with Terry and Dan. We're coming at you from City Hall this morning on behalf of the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. And thank you for joining us for our Books and Genealogy program. Before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. Mark your calendars. The next genealogy program will be held on Saturday, September 18th, and that one will be on school records. And so that'll work just like this one, where it's open and free to the public, but registration is required. It'll be a virtual meeting as well. Registration works just like this one. Registration's not open yet, but keep an eye out for that. You can call us at the museum directly and we'll get you signed up, or go to the website, museum.canyoncity, and we'll get you signed up. So today we're going to be talking about books and genealogy. So a lot of times when doing genealogy research, we think to look through our own family records, and we think to utilize online resources, but sometimes we forget to use books that can be a great resource for us. At the museum, we have a lot of books and a lot of reference files that can be helpful. And Terry's going to tell us a little bit more about that today. If you have questions throughout the program, please just utilize that chat box. Drop your questions in there. There'll be plenty of time at the end for us to go over those if Terry doesn't cover them during the program itself. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry and we're going to get started. Thank you.
Good morning. The first thing that I'm going to do is go back to this slide and recognize that in the popular days of staging, we see books placed in this particular order. There's nothing worse than not being able to see the spine of the book to see what it's actually about and what its title is. So please do not do this, even though it's a popular habit at this time. So without further ado, we're going to get started in our program this morning, and we're going to talk about books and all the things that they have to offer. We usually do turn to those websites that are most popular, and they are extremely valuable in obtaining some of the records. But know that there are also thousands of books that can also help you in your genealogical research. There are some research guides. The Source and Red Book are two of the primary sources that people turn to for genealogical research. There are also those books that deal with how to organize your files, laws and the copyright laws and the 72-year Privacy Act, and genealogical proof standards. And we're just going to look at a couple of those. If you've been to a large library that might have a genealogy section, you probably have seen both the Source and the Red Book. The Source is a complete guide for a series of articles explaining what kinds of records are available, where to find them, and what kind of information they can give you. These books are also available frequently in secondhand bookstores. And as recently as 2010, the Source was actually put online, so you can read it online rather than purchasing the book. It was originally published by Ancestry.com in 1984, and the current revision is a 2010 version. The Red Book is another one of those source documents that you turn to. It gives a complete listing of all of the counties within the United States and what records are available in each one of those counties. It also has excellent maps in it. We tend to gather plenty of records when doing our genealogy research. I don't know about you, but mine aren't in so many books, but more likely papers. And how do you organize those papers? There are many volumes that have been written that will help you choose a system that makes sense to you in order to organize your genealogy files. We don't want them in a closet, on the dining room table, or scattered throughout the office. We mentioned the 72-year Privacy Act. There are copyright laws, and there are guides for what are the legal sources for the family historian. If you are thinking about publishing anything, you probably want to think carefully and look at a volume very similar to this to make sure you're not violating any of the laws that may be in place. And of course, there are genealogical standards. How do you know that the information that you are collecting is truly valuable information? Does it meet the standards? When citing your documentation, you found a record, how do you cite properly the document or the website or wherever you have found that information? People, if you share it, or for your own benefit, if you need to go back to find that document, where did you find it? So citing your sources is extremely valuable. Since many of us do not have Native American ancestry, many of us are from European ancestry or Far Eastern or whatever, which means that we immigrated at some point in time. Know that there are a whole series of volumes concerning where your people actually came from, and we'll take a look at some of these. There are how-to books that will help you with your ethnic genealogy. You have to realize that Germany was not a unified country, that it was made up of a series of states. So what kinds of records were maintained in each one of those states? If you have a different kind of ancestry, for example, Irish or Swedish, the records that are available to you are far different from those that are available for German ancestry. So it's helpful to find a how-to book to look as to what kinds of records are available for your particular ethnic group. In addition to the how-to books, there are many books that talk about this one in particular, the immigration and the passenger lists. You will note in this particular case that this is volume 67, which covers from the end of 1895 to the middle of 1897. So there are 66 preceding volumes in this series that will list all of the ship records. If you can't find your immigrant ancestor on Ancestry or in Family Search, you have to realize that those records were extracted, that someone just like you and me interpreted the handwriting and determined what the spelling was. Likewise, in this book, someone took the time to look at the passenger ship list and interpret the handwriting. They may have interpreted it differently. So you may be able to find your immigrant ancestor in one of the books when you cannot find it on Ancestry or Family Search or any of the immigration websites. This series of books does expand to others as well. This one is for Italians. Know that they also have a series of books on the famine immigrants from Ireland. They have Russians to America and some other ethnic groups as well. Not only are there the immigration records, they do have specific ethnic records available. The African-American genealogy, there are unique records associated with that. Since many African-Americans came to this country as slaves and enslaved peoples, they were considered to be property. So many will records will be used in finding African-American genealogy. There are specific volumes, perhaps for the state that your ancestors lived in, that might give you information about researching your African-American ancestry. Likewise, there are volumes that will either give you the how-to or information about Native American, Jewish, Hawaiian, or Asian American genealogy. So don't overlook these volumes. We have a series of other sources, some of which are primary sources, many of which are secondary sources. And we're going to examine books that deal with each one of these particular topics. Here's a how-to volume for the state of Washington. Many states do have these particular types of volumes, and each state maintained records starting at different periods of time. The New England states, for example, might have started their records in colonial times, whereas as Western expansion throughout the United States occurred, other states came online, but the records are considerably later. Most states, because marriage is a contract, it is a legal document, most states recorded marriage records from the onset. If the courthouse got burned, they probably reconstructed the land and marriage records. But birth and death records did not come into full compliance until the 1920s. So when looking for records in your ancestors' home state, be sure that you know what types of records to look for, as well as when those records might have started. Counties and large cities also have reference books that will help you to find the documents that you are looking for. County lines, as states developed, county lines changed so that when you might look at one set of records in the early 1800s, they may be sitting on a boundary of a county that changed its lines or expanded or contracted and divided into other smaller counties. So be sure to look for county documents as well that might help you determine where records might be stored for your ancestor. This is another one locally here for Teller County, a guide for both genealogists as well as historians. Turning to history books, just plain old straightforward history books. While your ancestor may not be mentioned in these books, it gives you an idea of the life and times that your person lived in. If they lived in the same area, this one happens to be Champlain's settlement in Quebec, Canada. I had relatives that were early settlers in Quebec, Canada. So even though my relatives are not mentioned in this, it gives me an idea of how the community was set up and what kinds of information and the general history of the area, how it was originally settled in the Quebec City area and how they migrated outwards from there. Likewise, if you happen to be from northern Oklahoma, here's a history of the 101 Ranch. So, and the Buffalo Bill Cody show. So if your people were living in Oklahoma at the beginning of the last century, this might be something of particular interest to you. There are also county histories that will perhaps give you information about your ancestor. The county histories were usually written at the 100th anniversary or a sesquicentennial anniversary of the founding of the county. And in many cases, they tell the story of the founding of the county, the geographical description of the county, but they also might have portraits of the original settlers in the county. So if your people were in a particular county early on, you might find mention of them. Even if they are not mentioned, you will find other associated relatives, perhaps, or sketches of families and lifestyles that might pertain to your ancestor as well. There are histories of individual cities. And in this particular case, you'll note that the original volume was published in 1877 and that it was reprinted later on in 1969. So this is an early on account of the settlement. And we have to realize that we are putting 21st century eyes on many of these facts. And we need to think and look at what was the year of publication and how was life so different then. Military units, especially those of the Civil War. There are many, many volumes written about the individual units, whether they were Union or Confederate, whether they were regular Army or volunteer Army. And even if your person is not recognized or called out specifically in these volumes, you can get a listing of the campaigns that the unit participated in, the casualties, and the victories that they might have shared. So you can see and get a good complete explanation of a particular battle or war. These volumes do also exist for Revolutionary War and for Indian Wars timeframe. Not so much for World War I, the Spanish-American War, very little because it was mostly volunteer forces. And of course, World War II and forward are a little too current. But many of these unit histories are actually online, and you can find where your person might have been in a particular period of time. Did your people belong to a special religious group that might have immigrated at either colonial times or significantly later? If you know that you have French Protestant ancestry, for example, they may be Huguenots. But It's a volume like this that might help you to determine, did your people come from the La Rochelle area, which is in Eastern Atlantic France, or did they come from the Alsace-Lorraine area, which is closer to the German border? So reading a volume like this will perhaps help you narrow down where to look for records in an overseas venue. I found this volume particularly interesting. This is Irish Quakers. We think of the Settlement of Pennsylvania by William Penn, but William Penn was an Englishman, and many of the people that he brought over were Englishmen. So this one particularly addresses the Irish Quakers. We think of Ireland as being predominantly a Catholic or Church of England country. So know that there were Quakers too. And did your people perhaps belong to this early settlement? Journals, those firsthand accounts, are, especially on the part of women, are absolutely wonderful. What was it like to be a soldier's wife or the child of a soldier in the 1800s or late 1700s? What were the privations that they had to endure? Were children allowed to get education? What type of education did they have? What level were your people either officers or were they enlisted people? So these firsthand accounts, while they might not pertain to your particular ancestor, will give you a thorough understanding of what life was like on the various military posts that existed throughout the country, and what it was like when the men went out on campaign and the women and families were left behind for perhaps weeks or months. Here again, one of those firsthand accounts of a particular set of instances, one of the great escapes. And a biography. This one is a political biography. So it gives you some sociological understanding of what went on at this particular time period as well. We know that there are millions of records online for our people. But I read an article just recently that said that on Family Search, there are indeed millions of records online, but it only represents, I believe it was something like 20% of the records that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has. So it's only 20%. So if you can't find your records on Ancestry or in Family Search, you might also turn to books for the area where your people lived. And some of them, for example, this is just simply vital records that talk about births, marriages, and deaths. But we want to get more information about our people rather than just having them be statistics. There are indeed very many other sources for information that you might find. Some of them will be in depth, others of them might be just simple chance encounters. One of the focuses of genealogy societies is to gather and publish the records that pertain to their particular area. The one exception with genealogy societies is Bible records. If a Bible comes into the hands of a genealogy society, regardless of where it is located, they will extract and publish those biblical records, the births, the marriages, the deaths, and anything else that they might find in that family Bible. They want to get that information published and out into the general public. The records from genealogy societies are also deposited with the Allen County Library, and they make sure they maintain the Percy Index, which is a periodical source index. And that information would then be published in that. So it is distributed throughout the United States. Genealogy societies also look for records unique to their counties or their particular area to publish. The Fort Worth Genealogical Society, for example, undertook to reconstruct the 1890 census. The census was lost in a fire, and they used the other records that are throughout the county, whether they be city directories, tax records, Bible records, and various other records, probate records, for example, to reconstruct who might have been living in the Fort Worth, Tarrant County area in 1890. So this happens to be a CD rather than a book, but look at your genealogy societies. They also publish quarterlies or 3 times a year or semi-annual journals with scholarly researched articles by people from the local community or descendants of various people. So think about joining a genealogical society for the area that your people lived in to see if you can't find some more information. This is, for example, one of those quarterlies that come out that contain those particular types of articles. Oops, excuse me. Gazetteers. Gazetteers are geographical indexes or dictionaries that usually provide a history of the area, the geography of the area, but sometimes you might find a genealogical treasure in those. Gazetteers also exist for occupations as well as other unique subjects. This one happens to be for railway stations. If you had an ancestor that worked in any way, shape, or form for the railway, you might want to look at this particular type of gazetteer. If your people had a unique occupation, you might want to look in that gazetteer for methods, tools, what kinds of instruments they used in their occupation, and find additional information to add to your ancestors' story. Old travel logs and travel brochures. I mentioned earlier that my people were in Quebec, Canada. Kakuna is a very, very small town along the St. Lawrence River. And when I just did a search online for Kakuna, and this book popped up. I did not know my people were farming people. I did not know that Kakuna turned out to be a summer resort for the people from Montreal and Quebec. They would take a boat up the St. Lawrence River, and they would go bathing. They would escape the heat from the big cities in the summertime, and they would go bathing. And the other big thing was eeling. And to this day, they still do eeling in the St. Lawrence River. So look for these kinds of documents as well. Your place might have been something beyond just a farming community. There are pictorial guides put out for various cities or small towns even. And while they will feature for the most part just pictures, you never know when you might stumble upon a picture of one of your relatives in one of these volumes. They do have some very old pictures and they do have some newer pictures. So even if your family was there in like the 1950s, that for your children might represent a 2, 3, or even 4 generations back. Yearbooks and annuals. Did your person attend high school? Did your person attend a university? There might be not only a picture of the person, there is going to be other information about them contained in the annual that you might find interesting. What clubs did they belong to? Or what sports did they participate in? Things that add to the color of your person. Alumni directories. While this alumni directory was actually published in 1957, I found 2 relatives that, number one, I had no idea that they attended university, but number 2, did attend Georgetown University in the late 1890s. They were listed in this particular university, one under the School of Medicine and the other under the School of Law. They did not indicate that they had graduated, and as of 1957, they had no information as to whether they were alive or dead or where they might have lived. But just knowing that they went to Georgetown University adds to their biography. Is there a biographical dictionary that might list your people in it in some way, shape, or form? These do exist for many occupations. If your person was a glass blower, for example, there is a dictionary for those. This particular citation is for physicians of African ancestry, a unique volume, but there is also a biographical dictionary for American physicians. I have a first cousin who appears in that. He was a physician, and it gives what university he attended, what medical school he attended. He was a soldier, he was a doctor in World War II, and what unit he served with, as well as after World War II, what was his specific, he was an endocrinologist in later life, and he has long since passed away. So it was information that I did not have about his life. So you might consider looking for a dictionary for, here again, a unique occupation. And speaking of unique, we look for jewelry manufacturers. Who knew that there were volumes specifically dedicated to those? So think about what your ancestors might have done, what kinds of occupations they might have had that are different from those just of farmer or barber. Also, societies. Did they belong to unique fraternal organizations? And sometimes the histories of those will give you further information about your ancestor. There's always who's who in America. I think a number of years ago, I actually received a solicitation from Who's Who in America. So I don't know how truthful and valuable the information that is contained in them, but if you can find one of your relatives listed in one of these volumes, it might provide a little bit of information for you, and just know that they exist as well. This is an illustrated history. Here again, photographs. If you are writing a story about your ancestors, you want to include photographs. Even if it's a simple story about one grandparent, one great-grandparent, having a picture of the person, as well as pictures from the area where they lived, a picture of their home, or other personal things. If you don't have the personal photographs, go to the larger scope and see if you can't find information about the local area where they lived. Find pictures of representative stores from that particular area that might give you information about your ancestor and allow you to include that in your genealogy. People are more than just their births, marriages, and deaths. So think about it. Cultural history. This is one of the things that I find extremely interesting. What did our people wear? What kinds of shoes did they have? What did they eat? Throughout the generations. Food has changed over the centuries as well. We don't rely so much on bread anymore, although it is the staff of life. So are there things in a culture that might have been unique from your ethnic origin? You know, what kind of headwear did women wear? Men wore hats until the mid-1900s, but were there specific hats that separated them from other ethnic groups? Did they live in a sod house? What kind of windows did they have? Early in colonial times, windows were taxed. Glass windows in particular. So how many windows did they have? In Europe, even to this day, closets are taxed as a room. So, you know, that's why people had wardrobes rather than closets. So did your people, how many rooms were in their house for tax purposes? And apropos of housing, even on Facebook this week, I saw a house in Nevada that had been constructed from barrels. So you just never know. And that might give you something to look at as well. Did your ancestor have an occupation that no longer exists? And what were their beliefs and ideas? You can also always turn to historical novels to get an idea of the life and times of your ancestor. This happens to be a novel that covers 4 generations of African-American women who settled along the Cane River in Louisiana. But think about the novels of Willa Cather, for example. Her people settled in Kansas, and it gives very vivid and descriptive accounts of the life and times in that area. Think of the stories of Laura Ingalls Wilder, the Prairie House, Little House on the Prairie series of books. They give you a snapshot in time and a description of life in those times. And it's not all rosy pictures. Lucy Maud Montgomery, the Anne of Green Gables series for Prince Edward Island. So think about reading some novels that might give you additional information. What it was like to live during the Depression, what it was like to migrate from Oklahoma to California in search of work. So novels can even help you. Has there been a book written about your family? If not, there's something waiting for you to do. But know that the Library of Congress does keep and publish a bibliography of all of the genealogies that they have within their system. If someone actually publishes and copyrights a book, 2 copies of that book must be submitted to the Library of Congress. So they do have an extensive collection of genealogies. And look to see if your family name might appear, and if you can narrow down that it might be indeed some of your ancestors. When you are lucky enough to find one of these volumes, by all means, go ahead, look for it, scan it, read it, digest it, and hopefully share it with others. And if one does not exist, there are many how-to books that will tell you about writing your family history and how to organize it, but most of all, how to share it. So where do we find these books? The obvious answer is libraries and bookstores. But some of the not so obvious answers might also be through family associations, genealogical or historical societies. And we are going to look a little bit online to see what books might be available there. Libraries, of course, allow you to borrow books, and they do give you access to reference books. For the most part, reference books are not available to circulate. They do have interlibrary loan services. So if you do find a book that might pertain to your family history, you can request it through an interlibrary loan. As I just mentioned, research books or reference books frequently do not circulate, and many books from genealogical libraries do not circulate. But the library staff is willing to do the research and provide copy services for specific things that you might be looking for. In many cases, a fee is required, but in some cases it is free and a donation is accepted. Libraries do offer classes as well as cultural events, and they provide help with digitizing various forms of documents now. Bookstores. Bookstores offer a wide selection of genealogy type books. And if you're looking for some out of print books, you might consider secondhand bookstores. You might find an actual treasure in one of those. You might find one of those family histories in a secondhand bookstore. Family associations do exist and they do publish. This happens to be from the Jewett Family Association, and this is volume 1 of a 3-volume set that they did publish. I believe the first 2 volumes of this set are currently online. The 3rd volume is still only a printed work, but it gives a complete genealogy of the Jewett family, which started in Vermont in the 1600s. We're going to look a little bit online because there are books that are available online. In most cases, they have to be out of copyright in order for them to be readable online. This is a site known as Internet Archive, but the actual address is archive.org. And you can look for internet books that might be on the internet. In this one, I'm just looking, I don't know whether this volume actually exists, but I'm looking for a history of Lewis County, Kentucky. And if you want to see a book, you want to do just a search for text contents. If you do the search for metadata, you're going to get everything in the world, but look simply for the text contents. And I happened to luck out when I did get this. You see a number of things, and there are 4,763 actual results. And it's because it picks up each one of the words: history, Lewis County, Lewis, Kentucky, etc. But I got lucky, and the first one that appears is an actual book about the history of that particular area. Simply by clicking on that book, it brings up the scanned image. You'll notice that there's a bar down at the bottom. There are 518 pages, and you can slide this bar to turn the pages. It does allow you to increase the size, decrease the size so that things are more readable. If you want to search for a particular name or particular category or something, use this search box or search icon to search inside. Do not use this search because that will give you a whole new search. But simply by entering a search term in this box, it will allow you to find additional information. I entered Smith, just trying out something, and got 20 results. You will see this window will list them, and you'll see these little tick marks along the bottom. Those are each of the pages where the name Smith occurs. And you can scroll through this area in the area. This one has Harry Smith. There's another different Smith further down, but each one of these will recognize. Simply by clicking on this particular citation will take you directly to the page where that does exist. I have used the site numerous times and have been very, very fortunate in finding information. Google Books. That's the title. Here's their actual website. And in much the same way, they allow you to search for books, actual titles, or just search terms. Here I looked for that Kakuna, Quebec. I will say on the Google Books that only the books that have the symbol read will allow you to actually go in and read the book and see what it says. Others of them will say, I believe that something is not available, or it will give you an indication, but know that it's only the ones that allow you to read that you can see. And here was that search term, Quebec, Kakuna, and on this only single page, it lists the schedule and the fares for the boats from Montreal to Kakuna that I mentioned earlier. It does allow you to page through. It doesn't stick you on only the single page. You can clear the search term, and you can go backwards and forwards in the volume. So here, for example, is the title page for that particular, and you can read the entire volume if you so choose. Family Search also has the capability to look for books through their digital library. And when you do a search, it will allow you to look at records, genealogies, and the catalog, but there is a category for the books. So that's how you get to the digital library. I believe I was looking, the initial search was for Walla Walla, Washington, and I was looking for a particular set of marriage records for a Biersner family. This one happens to be a small book, and it lists the references for the Biersners that they found. If you click on the Find the Text Results, you do get the citations for Biersner, and you get to see the actual Biersner references for the marriages. Here again, it will allow you to page back and forth in it to see if there are others that might be in the book. So I would recommend that you try to use the Google Books function, as well as Family Search Books and others. So when thinking about books, we first of all don't want to overlook them. It is so easy from our homes to log on to the internet and do real research in the comfort of our own home. In many cases, these books are not going to be available online. You are going to have to go to a library, use the interlibrary loan services, or if you are vacationing in a particular area where your family might have lived, visit that local library to see if they have unique volumes that pertain to them. I know that the museum here has a small library, but it does have some of the history of Colorado volumes that do have portraits of the early settlers as well as well-known people. So don't overlook the idea of using books. They do teach basic research strategies. You know, how do you go about looking for those records, and how do you find them? Where do you find them? If you don't find them, what strategies might exist for finding something else that might help you to narrow down where your ancestor might have been? They do provide valuable resources for your research, and they give you those important clues on how your ancestor lived. I can't stress enough that you want your ancestor to We use the term put meat on the bones. We don't want them to be a simple statistic that they lived and they died. We want to know what their life was like. And if you want to publish or share, you don't have to write a book in order to share your information. They will give you ideas on simpler ways to share the results of your research. And in a couple of future programs, we too might be talking about that. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us this morning, and I will open it up to any questions that you might have.
Well, Terry, you have your normal following of faithful attendees,
Thank you.
but they didn't have any questions. But one of the things that came to my mind is at home in our personal library, we have collected, in fact, I saw some copies up there as examples, a number of books that deals with your research as well as my research of our families. But sometimes those books get temporarily stored in our normal library. And at our age, I think about, okay, at some time in the future, we hope it's going to be well into the future, that our children will gain possession of our libraries. And one of the concerns that just came to mind, you talking about all of the importance of these books, is at some point we probably need to move our genealogy related books out of our normal library shelves and make sure that's with all the other notebooks and paperwork dealing with our genealogy research. So when the time comes, they realize that this is not just some old book about New York or Quebec. This really is associated with your family history. So we don't want to lose the connection of these books with the research that they actually contain.
That's probably a very good point. One of the things that you as a genealogist need to do is perhaps share with your descendants or someone in the family who is interested in genealogy, and make sure that they know also that these books are valuable to the genealogy research that you have done. Make sure that they understand and know that, so that either they're not separated or, heaven forbid, thrown away or put in a garage sale. Well, if there are no further questions, if you do come up with a question between now and the next time, my email address is available. And if you would like to send that question to me, I will be happy to do any further research if I don't know the answer, or hopefully provide you with something that will guide you along your way. I appreciate your time and thank you so much. And we're going to once again advertise our program for next month. School days. With the return to school this month, we're going to look at the various records that might exist for your ancestor that might talk about the schools and the programs that they participated in. Thank you. And Jessica has a final word.
Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful. So much good information there. So much to unpack. I learned a lot today. I'm sure everyone tuning in did too. One thing that it made me think of, I don't know if you all are familiar with the poem. I think it's called The Dash or something along those lines. And the essence of it is that maybe on your headstone or wherever, that you have the birth date and the death date, but the significance really lies in that dash in the middle. And that really made me think of that when you talked about putting the meat on the bones, and just how fun it can be as you dig into this and learn more about these people. And your point of getting into even just a general history book to help kind of your imagination go and to understand just who these people were, what their lives are like. It's so cool. Thank you. This is a great program. We're looking forward to for the next one. So come on down to the museum anytime. We're happy to help you and see what we can uncover together. We are open Tuesdays to Saturdays, 10 to 4. Thank you.
Have a good day.